What else would you have? A meat tenderizer. That's a good weapon, right? People are made of meat. Yeah, we had a lot of fun making the action sequences here.
Jesus.
That's not where I was aiming.
Normal is the story of Ulysses, who becomes the interim sheriff of the small, sleepy town of Normal, Minnesota, where everything is normal. It stars Bob Odenkirk, and among the cast are Henry Winkler and Lena Headey. Yep, all three very normal characters who are played by actors who always play normal, unchallenging, face value characters who aren't hiding anything at all, and it's all very regular and normal.
Life in Normal is quiet, peaceful, predictable. Until it isn't.
Why are they shooting at you?
Okay, I think we all know that's not true. Normal is an action-packed thriller with black comedy moments and explosive surprises. Here to talk to me about it are the star and co-writer Bob Odenkirk, co-writer and producer Derek Kolstad, and producer Marc Provissiero. Thanks for coming in.
How about that, Derek? I got a writing credit.
I know. Geez, if we're now going to change it.
Here's the deal. I helped with the story, but Derek came up with the story, and I just assisted, and I appreciate that he gave me that nod. But Derek wrote the screenplay.
Director Ben Wheatley has called Normal an inverse of High Noon, and I've also seen the comparison to Bad Day at Black Rock, both classic westerns. Do you see this as neo-western, and what were you envisioning when you were creating it?
Well, I mean, I'm a huge fan of Spencer Tracy and those old movies of Guy Walks Into Town, you know? And Bad Day at Black Rock was the first one, and the second one was Stepford Wives, you know, of kind of going, everything looks a little too clean, a little bit too on the nose. And Bob and I just had fun then dismantling our way into this world. And ultimately, we're a huge fan of the postmodern Western. That's what this is.
I also think the Clint Eastwood movie, High Plains Drifter. There's a town. They need his help. They're all a little sketchy. Can he rely on them? It's one of my favorite films. I mean, all those early Clint Eastwoods I love. It is a modern Western for sure. And Ben Wheatley certainly envisioned it that way.
Something about Ulysses is he has a reputation for having a laissez-faire attitude. He doesn't ask too many questions, doesn't put his nose into things. He says things are easier if he cares a little less. So that's not necessarily the case, but can you talk about what's interesting about that kind of character and the journey to caring?
He's a guy who has lost faith in his own instincts. So as a result, he's in this town and there's some things that are off. You could tell he notices them, but you can also tell that he's sort of seemingly compartmentalizing them or just ignoring them. But in the end, he cannot ignore them. So it's an interesting guy who needs to regain the faith in his own judgment. And a lot of action movies are very simple in their structure, which is really one of the joys of them. But I just like this one because it had this texture and this opening chapters where Ulysses is becoming slowly aware of something wrong with this town.
Do you see some of Hutch from the Nobody movies in Ulysses at all?
I mean, both guys are, for different reasons, holding back their reactionary impulses. In the case of Hutch, he's doing it to present as a family man and to live that life, to live a double life, forcing himself to hold that in. So that's Nobody. In Normal, here's a guy who's a little bit broken when we meet him. And it's because he made a choice once before that just destroyed his life that he had, his perfect life. And so he's just gotten gun shy. But believe me, by the end of the movie Normal, he's not gun shy any longer. Is he gun crazy?
A little bit.
He's a little bit gun crazy.
Speaking of Nobody, you as a trio have worked as star, writer, and producer, respectively, on Nobody, Nobody 2, and now Normal. What made you decide to focus on a new original story at this point in your partnership?
On the first Nobody, there was a 2 hours where they were driving a bus around the city and Bob was being shot, and he and I were on the bus. And Marc said, so what else are you working on? I was like, I wrote this thing last night. And it was normal. And he's like, that's awesome. I was like, yeah, maybe, you know. And then 6 months later, years later, and finally Bob and I had a break in our schedules, and we're like, do you want to go do that one? And that's how it came about.
You said I wrote this last night?
The treatment.
Wow.
So a lot of times I'll write a treatment over the course of 6 hours. It tends to be between 15 and 30 pages, but it's just, I hike, I walk, I run, I Peloton, all that kind of stuff, and I'm writing in my head. So by the time I'm sitting down to type, it's just, here it comes, you know?
We thought it would be fun when Derek came up with this concept that we flipped to for normal. We thought it would be fun to do something outside the studio system. And we thought about what would make for a very appealing film to see in the theaters rather than building something for a streamer. There's very different approaches. I remember when first time I saw John Wick in the movie theater, I said, holy this is so fun. And I've gone to the movie theater every single time to see the sequels with my friends. And so we think about how can we build something that evokes the same response from people.
On that note, I mean, Derek and Marc, how did you know Bob would be good at this?
They didn't know that.
Well, Bob, our thesis was people around the world genuinely love watching Bob play a character that gets out of really bad problems with using his mouth. Wouldn't it be fun? Would people enjoy if they watched him use his fist to get out of problems?
Can you talk about your partnership with Bob and balancing comedy, action, and all other genres?
The biggest struggle we had was moving into the action space was no one took us seriously. The first time we went into the agency, there were 14 people in the room. Better Call Saul was a global hit. They had to pack the room with agents. People were stifling their laughter literally when we were telling them we're going to turn Bob into an action star for a studio film. And I don't blame them for that. Who could expect that to actually happen? They kept on sending us comedy writers. We kept on saying, as Bob would say best, you know, we need someone who knows how to write the third act of an action movie. And we did not know how to do that. And thank God, the creator of one of the greatest action franchises generationally was also a comedy nerd fan and completely got, right the first time we talked to him about it, there was no overcome. One thing we went out of our way to overly accentuate was we did not want, people were going to assume if they saw Bob at that time in a movie like this, that it was going to be an action comedy. And that was really important for us to over accentuate that it was a dramatic film and an action film. And then, yes, you were going to laugh within that, but we needed to make that distinction really clear.
I didn't need to learn to fight. I could have had some stunt guy who's shaped like me do all my fighting. But I didn't learn that till years later after I trained. No, it's not true. I like doing my own fighting. And if I'm doing my own fighting, they can keep the camera on me and I can play the guy. I can do his expressions. I wanted to play a guy who actually got hurt, who actually got worn down as you watch the movie. He gets tired, he gets hurt, he gets dinged up. Because I just feel like that is actually not something you've seen a lot of. Action stars that I know of, I don't know all of them, but the ones that I know are they're machines. They never really get hurt. There's they never accrue damage. And I wanted to play a guy who in these movies starts with a little bit of self-doubt and also accrues damage along the way.
Derek, we already brought up John Wick, so now I have to ask. You are the creator of the John Wick franchise and several action-heavy hitters on top of your work with Bob and Marc. Can you tell me what is the key to creating character-driven action movies that stand out among the rest? And is it helping dogs?
Dude, and the number of people that in the past have said, I turned off that movie at that point, and then someone said you should watch the rest of it. I'm a huge dog lover, so what I would say is my favorite action movies begin and end with the main character. You care about them, you give a shit, you know. And one of the best intros to a character ever is still Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark. You're introduced from behind, and he uses his whip, and he has the cat and the jacket, and then he loses and runs away and loses, and you're like, I love this guy. There's some sort of self-aware empathy at play, you know? And when it comes to the action heroes I love, they're not the best at what they do. They get up, they have will, they move forward, you know? You look at Riggs in the first couple of Lethal Weapon movies, he gets his ass handed to him, but he wills himself through to win. And ultimately, when he talks about sketch comedy, I talk about action, we kind of connect on the standpoint that they're very similar, an action scene and a sketch. You know, you got to have moments of humor, you have moments of character, because action was really an extension of the hero's journey. And ultimately, it's why we go back to watch certain movies over and over and over again. It's because it's like, you know, revisiting an old friend. So we love the people that we're creating here, and we just want to root for them.
One of my favorite scenes involves an unconventional weapon, a meat tenderizer hammer.
When I love stunt guys, you know, we actually spend a lot of time with the second unit just because it's more fun. But ultimately, when you write a scene and Bob and I imagine some stuff, what's on the page is meant to invigorate the stunt guys. And then you also say to them, but do your thing, you know? And so there are elements that are in the script that make it. Like there's a scene in the red circle in the first John Wick where John shoots this guy in the foot and he reacts and leans forward and John shoots him in the head. That's in the script. And I was like, oh! But then there's another scene where John grabs this guy, slams his head down, just unloads in his face. And I'm like, that wasn't in the script, but I was in the audience going, hoo hee hee. And with nobody, and with Normal especially, because we had a little bit more flexibility, it would be like, hey, instead of that, why don't we try this? What haven't we seen before? And yet not make it tongue-in-cheek, but it would make sense why a meat tenderizer would win against a knife.
We were stuck in that kitchen.
Yeah.
It was a thin space to work in, which is good and bad. I mean, whenever you've got a limitation, it inspires you, and of course you're like, oh, we can't go anywhere in here. But it's both, you know. And so you got the stove, you got drawers with in them, you've got, you know, shelving you can pull out. We needed something. I mean, this guy's got a knife, and there's a gun at play at a certain point in that scene. And what else would you have? A meat tenderizer. That's a good weapon, right? People are made of meat. Yeah, we had a lot of fun making the action sequences here, and a lot of inventiveness from everyone, certainly from the script, and then from Greg Rementer, and from the stunt guys, and from Ben Wheatley, and from Greg Rementer in the big battle between the Yakuza and the townspeople.
Do you think there's room for Normal 2? Is this the beginning of a new franchise?
I hope so. Because
he's still alive at the end.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of movies you watch, and you kind of care about the cowboy who goes off into the sunset to see what he does in the next town over. And here we have enough like seedlings of ideas that are kind of planted throughout this first one that we can bring it to harvest if we want.
I would love to do this guy again.
Yeah.
I just love getting to play a person with a past who's lived some life and is weathered by that and has to live with those regrets, has to forgive himself, has to carry on, because that's more who I am. And so I love playing Ulysses. Yeah, I would love to play him again.
All right, everyone, that is unfortunately all our time, but you can catch Normal in theaters this April, where it will be Magnolia Pictures' widest release to date. Have a real normal one, but I mean the kind of normal without any fiery explosions. Bye.